Welcome back. I'm charging up my Rivian R1T here today in my garage because in a couple of hours, I'm going to leave from my home in New Jersey and drive up to my in-laws' house in Vermont. It's more than 200 miles and it's below freezing outside right now. It's actually hailing here in New Jersey and it just started snowing up in Vermont. There's some winds involved also, so this isn't going to be a very easy task for the R1T. And I did this test a couple of months ago with my Ford F-150 Lightning and it made it. So I want to see if the R1T can duplicate this drive from northern New Jersey to Vermont in cold weather. Now, if this is your first time here, please click that subscribe button so you don't miss any upcoming news and reviews here on State of Charge. Okay, so as I said, a couple of months ago, I made this trip in my Ford F-150 Lightning. I'm going to put a link to that video in the description of this video if you want to watch that first. And the Lightning made it, but I really wasn't sure if it was going to make it before I left. I feel the same way with the R1T. I'm not quite sure if it's going to make it, and if it doesn't, it's really no big deal. I will stop along the route and DC fast charge. I have to make a decision before I get about 3/4 of the way because there's a last DC fast charger is about 3/4 of the way on the trip, and after that, I'm on my own. So I'll check in during the drive and we'll see if we need to stop or if we're going to make it. Hopefully we'll make it. I'd like to see this guy duplicate what the Lightning did. In order for it to do so, I need to average about 1.7 miles per kilowatt hour, which is lower than what I've been averaging. In the last 500 miles I've driven the truck, I've averaged about 1.83 miles per kilowatt hour. But a lot of that is low speed city driving. This is going to be all highway, well, mostly highway driving. I'm going to go 70 miles an hour, which is what I did with the Lightning. I'm going to set the cruise control to 70 miles an hour, drive the whole way at that speed. Now, in the very beginning and the very end, I'm off the highway, so we'll be driving at lower speeds. But once we get up to Vermont, it's been snowing there for a while, so the roads are going to be snow covered, and that adds rolling resistance. So I can't really rely on that last 25 miles, even though at lower speeds, being efficient. And plus there's an elevation climb at the end. So, I mean, technically, if you want to go by the numbers, I only need to average about 1.6 miles per kilowatt hour because the R1T has a battery pack with a usable capacity of 128 kilowatt hour. Now, I've had this for 6 months now. I probably lost a kilowatt hour or two. So let's say 126. So if you do the math, I only need to drive about 205 miles. 1.6 miles per kilowatt hour should do it, but I don't want to cut it that close. I'm not going to run out a couple miles from my in-laws' house and need to get towed and everything. I'm going to be arriving there late at night. It's going to be like midnight. So, you know, I don't think my wife would be very happy if we run out of charge and need to get towed at midnight a couple miles from their parents' house. So I'm going to make a decision based on the consumption rate. When we're about 3/4 of the way there, I want to be at least 1.7 miles per kilowatt hour. If I'm not, I'm going to pull into, there's an Electrify America site and plug in and charge. And at that point, if we have to do that, I'll record there. I'll talk about why I'm bailing and not going for it. But I hope that's not the case. I do want to make it. So I plugged this guy in about an hour ago because I want to time the charge finish right before I leave. Unfortunately, the Rivian, you can't do scheduled departure time as I could with my Lightning, where I can say, look, I need to leave at 7 o'clock today, and it'll just intelligently charge the vehicle to have it done right before that, and it'll also precondition the battery so that you leave with a warm cabin, a warm battery, and 100% charge. The Rivian can't do that, so I'm kind of manually doing it. I waited for the right time to plug in, and then I'm going to do the preconditioning maybe half an hour before we're going to leave, so we'll be all nice and warmed up and 100%. I mean, that's EV best practices. I know some people do cold weather range tests where they cold soak the truck and just let it sit out all night, and then they don't precondition, they just hop in it and go. That's one way to look at it, and that's valuable information also because you could kind of see worst case situation. But, you know, this is how I live with my EVs. If I know I'm going to go on a long trip, I do the right thing. I'll precondition, I'll set departure time if it has it, all the best practices so that you can get the most range out of the vehicle that you want. So that's what we did here today. I also set the tires. I made sure that they were all set to the manufacturer's tire spec, which in the case of the R1T, it's 48 pounds per square inch. It's really high tire pressure, but that's how I always have them set because that's what it's the recommended. This has the Pirelli Scorpion all-terrain tires on it, the 20-inch tires. And with this tire and wheel combination, The R1T has an EPA range rating of 289 miles per charge. If I had this with the road tires and the 21-inch wheels, it has 39 more miles of EPA range rating. So you take a big hit when you get the all-terrain tires on the Rivian R1T or R1S, but I just like the way they look better, and to be honest with you, I don't really need that much range. A couple times a year when I go up to Vermont, that's the only time, but for daily driving, I'll take the range penalty. I think these look cooler, and they're better for off-road if you're gonna go off-roading. But that plays a role here today, because if these were the road tires, I'm sure we would make it. But the fact that you lose about 40 miles of range with the all-terrain tires, it's going to cut it close. But that'll make good drama on the range test here today. All right, so we're going to hop in the vehicle and head out on the highway. I'll cut back in when we're on the highway and talk a little bit about some of the other things we did to prepare and what I expect to get out of this range test. This video is powered by Qmerit, North America's leading provider of installation services for electric vehicle charging, home energy storage, and other electrification technologies. See how Qmerit is making the energy transition easy for home and business owners by following the link in the description of this video. All right, so we're out on the highway now, cruising at 70 miles an hour. I'm here with my lovely wife, Meredith.
Hello.
So we're actually going up to Vermont to visit her parents. We do this every year. Last week was my birthday, and this week is Meredith's birthday. So we always go up the week of our birthdays, usually right in between like we are doing this year, to celebrate our birthdays up at her parents' house. So be a birthday weekend for us. So we're on the highway now, as I said, cruising at 70 miles an hour. I'm in conserve mode, which is the most efficient driving mode that Rivian offers. What it actually does is it decouples the rear two motors. So we're front wheel driving it along right now, and but that's not an issue. It still has plenty of power, the truck, even with just having the two front motors. It's still more than enough power than what you could really need. But in any event, the wind is pretty bad today. When we left, it was 15 miles an hour. It's 14 miles an hour now. It's coming from the northwest, which is very similar to when we took the Lightning up to our parents' house. When we did that range test, the wind was coming from the northwest, and it was between 12 and 15 miles an hour for that whole trip. And it seems like it's about the same so far. So wind was a factor then, it's going to be a factor again now. We're doing pretty good though. We're averaging right now 1.8 miles per kilowatt hour, which is a little bit better than I was hoping. But the first 20 miles or so we weren't on the highway, so we did have a better consumption, and now it's starting to drop as we're out on the New York Thruway driving along. When we were fully charged, the car showed 284 miles of range, but it was in all-purpose driving mode at that point. I didn't put it into conserve till I started driving, and about 2 miles in, I almost forgot, and then it jumped up to 315 miles of estimated range. But Rivian doesn't use a dynamic range estimator. Like Tesla, they don't account for weather, topography, past driving history on the main range estimator. It's just strictly how much energy is in the battery based, and then multiplied by the average consumption that they used for the EPA range rating. So it doesn't account for the recent driving. Like for instance, when I did the range test with my Lightning, and the Lightning has a dynamic range estimator, it was estimating 207 miles of range when we were fully charged, because it was in the winter and it had my recent driving history. But with the Rivian, it's given me the same range rating regardless of whether it's cold out or what my previous driving history was. Now in the nav system, when I set a destination, there it shows you the proper range that you should have. So it's kind of weird, and that's how Tesla does it too. I prefer dynamic range estimators on the main range screen, so it gives you a little bit more of a realistic estimate of what you'll be driving. So even though this showed 284 miles of range, and then like 315 miles when I put it in conserve mode. We're not going to get anywhere near that today. That would be in like really ideal driving conditions. But we're on track to beat the 1.7 miles per kilowatt hour that I need to make it here. Traffic's been pretty good so far. We've been able to cruise along at 70 miles an hour. We're in the slow lane. There are some cars passing us. As I say that now, there's a truck that's going slow and I need to pass him. So let me make this pass really quick. All right. Yeah, he was going like 50 miles an hour. All right. Yeah, if that. And but all along we've been averaging the 70 just fine. Let me get it back on up to 70. Okay, I got the cruise set on 70. And the Rivian's driver assist doesn't have hands-free driver assist like my Blue Cruise on the Ford does, so I kind of missed that. On these long drives, the hands-free Blue Cruise is really great. I mean, this system works great, but you got to keep your hand on the wheel. You got to tug the wheel every now and then to let it know that you're there and you're being attentive. So we're going to check in when we're at 50% of the way, and we'll see. No, actually 50% state of charge. Hopefully, we're beyond 50% of the trip. We'll talk a little bit about where I was with the Lightning when I was at 50%, and hopefully we'll be at least, we'll have at least as much battery left as we did in the Lightning, and that way I'll feel comfortable making the rest of the trip. So we'll check back in about a half an hour when we are at 50% state of charge. All right, so we are at 50% state of charge, and we have traveled 117 miles. With the Lightning, at 50% state of charge, we had traveled 116 miles. So the Rivian's doing slightly better, and our consumption rate is about 1.9 miles per kilowatt hour. Much better than what we did with the Lightning, which was we were at 1.7 miles per kilowatt hour. And since the Lightning only has a slightly larger battery pack, 128 kilowatt hour usable in the Rivian, 131 kilowatt hour usable in the Lightning, I'm pretty confident we're gonna make it. So we're gonna go for it. I'm not gonna stop to DC fast charge. We have less than 100 miles to go, and we've traveled 117 miles with the first 50% of the battery. So we're gonna go for it, babe.
We better make it. I will not be happy if we're walking at midnight.
Yeah, it's not good walking conditions. It's down, right now it's about 24 degrees and it's windy, and we're going to a really rural part. There's all woods, so it wouldn't be a fun walk to her parents' house, even if we only had to walk like a mile or two at the end. But I promise that won't happen.
Better not happen. There'll be trouble.
Yeah, there'll be trouble for sure. So no, we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. And as I said, the crazy thing is how close these two cars are. The Lightning at 50%, from 100 down to 50%, drove 116 miles. The Rivian from 100% down to 50% drove 117 miles on the same course, and really very similar conditions. The temperature was a little bit colder for the Lightning. The wind was about the same for the most of the trip, but now the wind's gotten a little better here now. I'm only seeing about 11 mile an hour winds from the northwest. So it actually has gotten a little bit better wind-wise for us here. And honestly, might be the difference, because we were averaging like 1.82 miles per kilowatt hour, and then it crept up to almost 1.9. So the wind makes that much of a difference. Wind and tire pressure could make a big difference when you're on a road trip with any car. But if you have an EV and you're trying to squeeze out the miles, make sure your tire pressure is set to the right pressure, as we did here before I started this trip. You can add another 10 or 15 miles of range to your trip if you have the right tire pressure. If you're a couple pounds lower, it'll hurt. So, okay, we're gonna continue on now. When we arrived at her parents' house with the Lightning, we had driven 211 miles. We were at 3% state of charge, and it was estimating that we had 5 miles remaining. So That's the measuring stick. We're going to see if we can get there with more than 3% state of charge. And if that happens, the Rivian will have beaten the Lightning on this trip. I'm just glad both of these vehicles made it in the winter in cold temperatures. When we left my house, it was, I think, 28 degrees. It's going to get down to probably around 20 when we arrive up in Vermont. So the Lightning was 17 degrees when we left, and actually 17 degrees in Vermont when we arrived. So it was slightly colder, but that shouldn't make that much of a difference. So all right, we're going to forge on now, and we'll check in when we arrive, or as we're walking to the house, trying to make it there.
That won't be good.
That won't happen. We're going to make it. All right, see you when we're in Vermont. All right, we're here at my in-laws' house, and the Rivian made it. Unfortunately, Meredith didn't quite make it. She was dozing the last half hour or so of the trip, and she already went inside the house to go to sleep. It's after midnight now. We got off to a late start today, so that's totally understandable, and she worked all day. So finished up with 211 miles driven, the same distance that we did with the Lightning. And if you remember, the Lightning finished up with 3% state of charge and about 5 miles of estimated range remaining. But I think it probably could have went somewhere around 10 to 15 more miles because there's a little extra low-end buffer in there. We ended up here with 8% state of charge. So the Rivian beat the Lightning by 5% state of charge. We're probably good for another 20 miles of driving here. So even in cold weather at highway speeds, I can confidently say I can go 230 miles with the R1T now. And it is 19 degrees Fahrenheit now. We finished up at 19 degrees. When I left in Chester, New Jersey, it was, geez, now I can't even remember. I think it was 28 or 29 degrees, somewhere around there. It was right below 30 degrees. It was below freezing for sure. And it was actually hailing out. The snow had stopped here. They only had flurries here. There's really no accumulations, but it's 19 degrees, so it's pretty cold. We did the trek in just under 4 hours, and we averaged, I think it was 55 miles an hour, and that's with the fact that the last 20 or so miles and first 20 miles weren't at 70 miles an hour, or at lower than 70 miles an hour. Some of them are all secondary and tertiary roads, especially up here in Vermont. The last 8 or 9 miles, I think I was only driving like 35 miles an hour. Funny thing is, when I did the Lightning test, everybody was commenting and saying, you know, Tom, you're at 3% state of charge. You're up here in Vermont. You're in the middle of nowhere. What are you going to do now? How do you charge? You can't really even get to a charging station. So I had to explain in the comments section what I did, but on this video, I'm gonna give you a visual explanation of what I do when I arrive at my in-laws' house and my battery is drained. All right, for those interested in how I charge my EVs when I arrive up here in Vermont, here's the answer. But this is brand new. When I came up with the Lightning a couple of months ago and did that cold weather range test, I brought this 48 amp wall box charger with me. That was to replace the OG Clipper Creek unit that I installed up here in 2012. I've been driving EVs for a long time, since 2009, and coming up here to Vermont. I installed this Clipper Creek, which is a CS40. It can deliver 32 amps to the electric vehicle. Back then, in 2012, 2013 at time, EVs didn't charge at a rate higher than 32 amps. Their onboard chargers were 32 amps and sometimes even less. Over the years, then 40 amps became the norm, and now 48 amps is kind of the norm. And with new EVs like my Lightning, some of them with really big batteries have 80 amp onboard chargers. So for a long time, that Clipper Creek unit charged my EVs coming up here. But now that I have the Rivian R1T and the F-150 Lightning, they have really big batteries. This takes really long to charge. The wall box I plugged in charges at about 24 to 25 miles of range per hour. I was only getting about 15 miles of range per hour with the 32 amp Clipper Creek unit on the Rivian R1T. So now if I pull up, even if the battery's exhausted and I plug in with this guy, it'll be fully charged by the morning. with the Clipper Creek CS40, when I came up here with my Lightning the last time, it wasn't nearly charged by the next day. I actually drove into town and there's a new Flow DC fast charger, and I used that for a half an hour and it fully charged me up. So, but that won't be a problem anymore because this guy can deliver 11 kilowatts, and you know, by the time I get here at night and plug in the next morning, I'm going to be at least 80% charged. I'm usually here for a couple days, so I can leave it in the garage and charge up to 100% to head home in any event. But this makes it a lot more convenient. This guy here is going to get retired. I'll probably hang it up on my wall of chargers at home and reminisce about the good old days of EV charging 10, 12 years ago. Well, that's it for our Rivian R1T cold weather range test, New Jersey up to Vermont, 211 miles. We made it without a problem, and we beat the Lightning. The Lightning arrived with 3% state of charge. I arrived here with 8% state of charge. That's a good sizable amount, 5% more. And the Rivian actually has a slightly smaller battery pack than my Lightning. So definitely more efficient in cold weather at highway speeds. Listen, if this is your first time here at State of Charge, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Give me a like on this video, all that good stuff. And as always, thanks for watching.